Before the city woke up while the stars still clung to the sky and the air hung cool and quiet, he was already on the road. His rickshaw, old rust-speckled, its red paint faded to a dull pink, creaked with every step. The wooden handles were smooth from years of sweat and grip, worn down like the soles of his sandals. He pushed forward, shoulders hunched, breath steady but shallow, eyes fixed on the cracked pavement ahead. He didn't mind the early hours. In fact, he preferred them. At this time, the streets belonged to him and a few others like him. Street sweepers, milkmen, the occasional dog nosing through trash. No honking, no shouting, no impatient passengers snapping their fingers. Just the soft thud of his feet, the whisper of tires on wet concrete, and the distant hum of a train far off in the dark. By the time the first rays of sun brushed the rooftops, he'd already done 2 short trips, carrying a schoolboy with a too big backpack, then an elderly woman clutching a basket of vegetables. Both paid fairly, both said thank you. Small things, but they warmed him more than the weak morning sun. He wasn't young anymore. His back ached if he stood too long. His knees cracked when he squatted. But he never complained, not out loud anyway. Complaining wouldn't fill the rice pot. It wouldn't buy notebooks or medicine. It wouldn't bring her back. His wife had passed 3 winters ago after a fever that wouldn't break. He'd sold their small gold chain to pay the doctor, but it wasn't enough. After that, it was just him and his daughter. She was 16 now, quiet, sharp-eyed, always bent over books at the kitchen table long after the streetlights came on. He'd never gone to school past the 5th grade. But he knew the value of learning. He'd seen how people with degrees walked differently, heads high, voices calm, never having to lower their eyes when speaking to a clerk or a landlord. He wanted that for her. More than anything, so he pushed. Through rain, through heat, through days when his arms trembled and his stomach growled like a caged animal. He pushed because there was no one else to do it. Because giving up wasn't a word in his dictionary, it was a luxury for people who had cushions to fall on. That morning, a man in a crisp white shirt flagged him down near the market. "Take me to the railway station." "Fast," he said, already climbing in without waiting for a reply. He nodded, wiped his brow with the edge of his shirt, and started pushing. The man tapped his foot impatiently, checked his watch twice, and sighed loudly every time they slowed for a turn. When they arrived, the man tossed a few coins onto the seat, less than half the agreed fare. "That's all you're getting," he said, stepping out without looking back. "You took too long." He stood there, hands still on the rickshaw handles, heart pounding, not from the run, but from the sting. He wanted to say something, to stand tall and demand what was fair, but his throat closed. He thought of the rice at home, the kerosene running low, the exam fees due next week, so he picked up the coins, counted them silently, and tucked them into his pocket. He didn't curse, didn't shout, just turned the rickshaw around and walked back toward the empty lanes, head down, jaw tight. By mid-morning, the heat pressed down like a heavy blanket. Flies buzzed around fruit stalls, sweat soaked through his thin cotton shirt. He found a patch of shade near a temple and sat on the curb, pulling out a small steel tumbler. He'd filled it with water before leaving home, just enough for the day. He sipped slowly, watching children in uniforms laugh as they walked to school. One of them looked like his daughter, same serious eyes, same neat braid. He smiled faintly. She'd stayed up late again last night, studying under the single bulb in their one-room home. He'd pretended to sleep, but he watched her through half-closed eyes. The way her pencil moved quickly across the page, the way she bit her lip when thinking hard. He'd wanted to cover her with a shawl when she dozed off at the table, but he didn't want to wake her. Let her rest even for a few minutes. Back on the road by noon, he took a fare to the hospital. An anxious father clutching a crying baby, he pushed faster than usual, weaving through traffic with a care he rarely allowed himself. When they arrived, the man pressed a full fare into his hand, plus a little extra. "For your kindness," he said, already rushing inside. That small kindness stayed with him all afternoon. As evening fell, the city changed. Lights flickered on. Vendors lit their stoves. The air filled with the smell of frying onions and diesel fumes. He made one last trip, carrying a stack of newspapers for a shopkeeper who'd known him for years. The man handed him a warm roti wrapped in paper. "Eat," he said. "You look thin." He thanked him but saved it for later. When he finally reached home, a tiny room tucked behind a row of shops, The door was slightly ajar. Inside, his daughter was bent over her books, pencil in hand, hair loose around her shoulders. A single bulb cast a yellow circle of light on the table. "You're late," she said, not looking up, but her voice was soft, not scolding. "Traffic," he replied, setting the rickshaw outside and locking the chain. She finally looked at him, saw the dust on his clothes, the tired lines around his eyes. Without a word, she got up, filled a bowl with water and placed it near his usual spot on the floor. He washed his face, then his feet, the cool water a small relief. She served dinner, rice, thin dal, a few pieces of boiled potato. They ate in silence, the kind that didn't need filling with words. He watched her eat, making sure she took enough. She always tried to leave more for him, but he'd learned to outsmart her, pretending he wasn't hungry, pushing his portion toward her when she wasn't looking. After dinner, she cleared the plates while he sat by the window, staring at the street below. A neighbor's radio played a soft old song. Somewhere a baby cried. Life went on, ordinary and unglamorous. She came and sat beside him, holding a letter in her hands. Her fingers trembled slightly. "What is it?" he asked. She didn't answer right away, just handed him the envelope. His name was written in neat handwriting, her handwriting. He opened it slowly, his rough fingers fumbling with the paper. Inside was an official letter from a medical college. Accepted, full name. Program, Bachelor of Medicine. Start date next month. His breath caught. He read it twice, then a third time as if the words might vanish. He looked at her. Her eyes were bright, but she wasn't smiling. She was waiting for his reaction, for his worry, for the truth they both knew. This dream cost more than they had. He folded the letter carefully, pressed it flat against his knee, and then did something he hadn't done in years. He smiled. A real one, wide, proud, full of light. "You'll be a good doctor," he said simply. She blinked fast, then nodded. But he saw the fear behind her eyes, the fear of disappointing him, of failing, of dragging him deeper into debt. He reached out and touched her hair just once. "Don't worry about anything," he said. "Just study." "I'll manage," she wanted to argue. He saw it in the way her lips pressed together. But she didn't. She trusted him. That trust was heavier than any rickshaw. Later, when she was asleep on her thin mattress, he sat by the door, the letter in his lap. Outside, the city slept. Inside, his mind raced, calculating, planning, hoping. He thought of his wife. Would she be proud? He hoped so. He didn't sleep that night. Not really. Just dozed in short bursts, waking every hour to check on his daughter, to listen to her steady breathing, to remind himself why he pushed. Before dawn, he was up again. Washed his face, checked the rickshaw's tire, tied his sandals tight. The road waited, and so did he. The letter sat on the small wooden table like a promise and a problem. Every time he looked at it, his chest swelled with pride, but his stomach twisted with worry. Medical college. His daughter accepted. But the numbers printed at the bottom of the page, tuition, lab fees, hostel deposit, might as well have been written in another language. They were too big, too far out of reach. He didn't say anything at first. Just folded the letter again, tucked it into the metal box where he kept important papers, birth certificates, her school awards, the faded photo of his wife, and went back to work. But that morning his steps felt heavier. The rickshaw seemed to drag as if it too understood the weight of what lay ahead. He took more trips than usual, skipped his midday rest, drank less water to avoid stopping. Every coin mattered now. Every rupee counted. At night he'd sit with a small notebook, scribbling down earnings, subtracting food, kerosene, rent. The numbers never added up to enough. Not even close. One afternoon, after dropping off a passenger near the college campus, he lingered, watched students in crisp white coats walk between buildings laughing, carrying thick books. He felt out of place in his worn shirt and dusty sandals, but he walked in anyway, past the guard who barely glanced at him, and found the administration office. Inside, the air was cool, smelling of paper and polish. A man behind a large desk looked up, eyebrows raised. "Yes?" He cleared his throat. "My daughter. She got admission. In medicine." The man nodded slowly, not unkindly, but with the tired air of someone who'd heard this too many times. "Congratulations. I can't pay the full fees," he said, voice low. "But she's very bright. Top of her class. Is there any help? Scholarship? Anything?" The man leaned back, fingers steepled. We have limited seats for financial aid. All filled. You can apply next year. Next year? His voice cracked. She can't wait. She's ready now. The man sighed, opened a drawer, and handed him a form. Fill this out. Submit income proof, ration card, everything, but don't get your hopes up. He took the form like it was made of glass, walked home in a daze. That night, under the dim bulb, he tried to fill it out. But what could he write? His income wasn't fixed. Some days he earned 200 rupees, some days 50. No bank statements, no payslips, just calloused hands and tired bones. His daughter watched him struggle. Didn't say a word. But the next morning she was up before him. Made tea, packed his lunch, extra rice, a boiled egg she must have saved from somewhere, and handed him his towel. You don't have to do this alone, she said quietly. He looked at her, surprised. Do what? Carry everything, he almost smiled. It's my job. No, she said, meeting his eyes. It's ours. He didn't argue, just nodded, touched by her quiet strength. Days passed. He kept pushing the rickshaw, but now with a new urgency. One evening, returning home late, he found her gone. Panic shot through him, until he saw a note on the table. Gone to tutor at Mrs. Gupta's, back by 8. His heart sank. She was taking on work. At 16. After full school days. He waited, pacing near the door. When she returned, eyes tired but posture straight, he didn't scold her. Just heated the dinner she'd left for him and said, Eat, you must be hungry. She sat, chewed slowly. The kids are nice. 2 brothers. I teach them math and science. They pay well, he nodded. Good, but inside he ached. She should be resting, dreaming, not trading her youth for coins. That night, he made a decision. He waited until she was asleep, then opened the small wooden trunk under their bed. Inside, wrapped in a clean cloth, was his wife's only piece of jewelry, a thin gold bangle, worn smooth from years of use. She'd worn it every day, even when cooking, even when washing clothes. After she passed, he couldn't bring himself to sell it. It was all he had left of her voice, her laugh, the way she'd hum while sweeping the floor. Now he held it in his palm, cold, heavy with memory. He closed his eyes, whispered, Forgive me. The next morning, before sunrise, he walked to the old gold market. The shopkeepers knew him, not as a customer, but as the rickshaw man who sometimes waited outside while others traded. One of them, an older man with kind eyes, recognized the bangle. This was hers, wasn't it? He asked gently. He nodded, unable to speak. The man weighed it, checked the purity, then offered a fair price, more than he expected. Enough to cover the first semester's fees with a little left over. He took the money, folded it into his inner pocket, and walked out without looking back. The sun was rising, painting the sky in soft oranges and pinks. He felt lighter, yet emptier. But he didn't regret it. If his wife were here, she'd have done the same, maybe faster. At home, he didn't mention where the money came from. Just handed the college office a thick envelope the next day. The same man behind the desk looked surprised. You managed it? Yes, he said simply. They processed the admission. Gave him a receipt, a schedule, a list of things to buy, stethoscope, white coat, textbooks. Each item felt like another mountain to climb. But he climbed. He worked longer hours, took night shifts near the bus stand, where travelers paid extra for quick rides. Once he fell asleep sitting on the rickshaw seat, head resting on the handlebars. A street dog came and sniffed his shoe, then curled up beside him like a guard. He woke up an hour later, stiff and cold, but grateful for the brief rest. Meanwhile, his daughter kept tutoring. Came home with ink on her fingers and new confidence in her step. She started helping neighbors with paperwork, translating official letters for elderly tenants who couldn't read. Word spread. Soon more families asked for her help. She never charged much, just enough to add to the college fund. One evening, she brought home a second-hand stethoscope she'd found at a medical flea market. It works, she said, placing it in his hands. Listen. She pressed the cold metal to his chest. He heard his own heartbeat. Steady, strong, stubborn. You'll hear many hearts like this, he said, handing it back. Make sure you listen well, she smiled. That smile, so like her mother's, made all the exhaustion worth it. But the money still wasn't enough. Books alone cost a fortune. Uniforms, lab fees, exam charges, they kept coming like waves that wouldn't stop. He sold his only spare pair of sandals. Gave up tea at the roadside stall. Ate plain rice for 3 days straight. One afternoon, pushing a passenger through a crowded market, he stumbled. His knee gave out for just a second, but it was enough. The rickshaw tilted. The passenger shouted. He caught himself, apologized, finished the trip. But back home his leg throbbed. He soaked it in warm salt water, massaged it with oil, tried to ignore the sharp pain. His daughter noticed. Rest tomorrow, she insisted. I can't, he said. Fees for the practical exam are due Friday. She didn't argue. Just stayed up later that night, writing notes for her students, solving extra problems. The next morning she handed him an envelope. From the Guptas. They paid early. He opened it. More than expected. Enough for the exam fee and a small bottle of pain balm. He looked at her, eyes wet. You're too much, she shrugged. Just doing my part. That weekend he finally took half a day off. Not to rest, but to walk to the college and see her classroom. He stood outside the lecture hall, hidden behind a pillar, watching through the open door. She sat in the front row, hand raised, answering a question clearly, confidently. The professor nodded, impressed. He didn't go in. Didn't want to embarrass her. But he stood there until the bell rang, until she walked out with friends, laughing about something he couldn't hear. He turned and walked away, heartful. That night, over dinner, she said, I got selected for a special workshop. Top 10 students. Free training, he beamed. Of course you did, but she hesitated. It's in another city. For 2 weeks. Travel and food. I told them I can't go. He put down his spoon. Why not? Because... She looked at her plate. Because of money. And you? He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, You're going. But no buts. Pack your bag. I'll manage. She opened her mouth to argue, but saw the look in his eyes. The same look he'd given her the day she got the acceptance letter. Final. Loving. Unshakable. She nodded slowly. Okay. The next morning he pushed his rickshaw with extra strength in his step. The road ahead was still hard. But for the first time in a long while it didn't feel endless. Because now he wasn't just pushing for survival. He was pushing for her future. And that made all the difference. Rain came without warning that evening. One moment the sky was a dull gray. The next fat drops hammered the streets like impatient fists. People scattered. Shopkeepers pulled down shutters. Students ran with books over their heads. Auto drivers sped up to beat the storm. He was near the old post office, waiting for a fare. When he saw the man, an older gentleman dressed in a light cotton suit, stood under a broken awning, arms crossed, shoulders hunched against the downpour. His shoes were already soaked, his hair plastered to his forehead. He looked lost, not just in the weather, but in thought, like someone carrying a quiet sadness. Without thinking, he wheeled his rickshaw closer. Need a ride, sir? The man looked up, surprised. At this hour? In this rain? I'm still working, he said simply. The man hesitated, then nodded. Just to the corner of Maple Lane, it's not far. Get in. I'll take you. The man climbed in carefully, trying not to drip too much on the seat. He sat upright, hands on his knees, staring ahead as the rain drummed on the rickshaw's thin roof. He pushed hard against the wet wind, boots slipping on puddled pavement, but kept a steady pace. Halfway there, the man spoke. You didn't have to stop. Most wouldn't. He shrugged, breath coming fast. Everyone gets caught in the rain sometimes. They rode the rest of the way in silence. When they reached Maple Lane, the man stepped out, shook his coat, then reached into his pocket. He pulled out a crisp note, enough for 3 rides. Here, and thank you. He shook his head. No, sir. Just the usual fare. The man frowned. You worked in this storm? Take it. I can't, he said gently. You needed help more than I needed money. The man paused. Looked at him, not just at his worn clothes or tired face, but into his eyes. Something passed between them, quiet and real. Then the man smiled, a small, genuine thing. What's your name? He told him. The man nodded slowly, as if filing it away. I won't forget this. He didn't think much of it after that. Just another rainy evening, another small act that meant nothing and everything all at once. He went home, changed into dry clothes, warmed his hands over the stove, and listened to the rain tap on the roof while his daughter read aloud from her medical book. Days turned into weeks. Life went on as it always did. Early mornings, long hours, rice and dal, quiet talks at night. He heard nothing more about the man in the rain. Then one afternoon, as he rested near the tea stall, a black car pulled up. Not just any car. Shiny, quiet, the kind that glided instead of rolled. The window rolled down. It was the same man. "Can I speak with you?" the man asked. He stood, brushing dust off his shirt. "Of course, sir." The man stepped out. He looked different now, calmer, sharper, dressed in a well-tailored kurta. He introduced himself properly this time. A retired businessman, once owned factories, now involved in community projects. "He'd been looking for him for days. I asked around," he said. "The post office guard remembered your rickshaw. The tea seller knew your route." He was confused. "Why?" "Because I've been searching for someone," the man said, voice low. "Not just anyone. Someone who helps without expecting anything back. Someone who still believes in kindness, even when life hasn't been kind to them." He didn't know what to say, just stood there, hands in his pockets, heart beating a little faster. The man went on. "I'm starting a new transport service, electric cabs, clean, affordable for people like you and me. I need someone honest to help run it, someone who knows the streets, who understands what it means to work hard, who won't cut corners or cheat drivers." He laughed softly. "Sir, I push a rickshaw. I don't know anything about managing cars." "You know people," the man said. "That's more important." He shook his head. "I appreciate the offer, but I can't leave my work. My daughter, your daughter is in medical college, yes?" The man interrupted gently. "I heard from the neighbors. You sold your wife's bangle to pay her fees." He froze. "How?" "Word travels when someone does something brave," the man said. "I'm not offering charity. I'm offering partnership. A real job, fair pay, health coverage. And if you agree, I'll also arrange a full scholarship for your daughter, through a trust I support. No loans, no debt." The words hit him like a wave. He gripped the edge of his rickshaw to steady himself. "Why me?" he finally asked. "Because the world has too many clever people," the man said. "Not enough good ones." They sat on a nearby bench while the man explained more. How the cabs would be run by former rickshaw pullers, how training would be provided, how profits would be shared. It wasn't a handout. It was a chance to build something better, together. He listened, really listened. Not just to the words, but to the hope behind them. That night he didn't sleep. He paced the small room, turning the offer over in his mind. Was it too good to be true? Was he being foolish to trust a stranger? But then he remembered the look in the man's eyes during the rain, the same look he saw in his daughter's when she talked about healing people. In the end, he made his decision not for himself but for everyone like him. The next morning, he met the man again, this time at a small office near the city center. Papers were signed, not with grand ceremony but with quiet respect. He asked one condition, that other rickshaw drivers get first chance at the new jobs. The man agreed without hesitation. Training began the following week. He learned how to use a tablet, how to manage schedules, how to speak to drivers with fairness and firmness. It felt strange at first, wearing clean clothes, sitting in a chair instead of pushing wheels. But he adapted. Slowly, surely. Meanwhile, his daughter got the scholarship letter. She read it 3 times, then looked at him with tears in her eyes. "How did you—" "I didn't," he said. "Someone saw what you're worth." She hugged him tightly. He held her, feeling her tears soak into his shirt, and for the first time in years, he let himself believe things could change. One evening after training, he walked past his old rickshaw stand. The other drivers called out to him, half joking, half worried. "You've gone fancy on us." He laughed. "Not fancy, just trying something new." He told them about the electric cabs, the jobs coming, the fair wages. Their eyes lit up, not with envy but hope. A few days later, the first black car arrived. Sleek, silent, painted a deep, dignified black. He ran his hand over its smooth surface, remembering the rust and creak of his old rickshaw. It wasn't just a vehicle. It was a promise. The man in the rain stood beside him. "Ready?" He took a deep breath. Looked at the road ahead, no longer just a path of survival, but a road of possibility. "Yes," he said. "Let's begin." And as the sun dipped below the rooftops, casting long shadows on the wet street, he knew one thing for certain. Sometimes, the smallest act of kindness, like giving a ride in the rain, can change everything. The first black car rolled into the depot just before sunrise. It wasn't loud or flashy, no honking, no smoke, but it moved with a quiet confidence that turned heads. Other rickshaw pullers stopped mid-stride to stare. Some squinted as if they couldn't believe their eyes. Others whispered, "Is that really him?" He stood beside it wearing a clean navy blue uniform with a small badge on the chest, his name stitched in neat white thread. He'd ironed it himself the night before, running the hot iron slowly over the fabric, smoothing out every wrinkle like he was smoothing out years of worry. This wasn't just a job. It was a new beginning, for him and for the men who'd spent their lives bent over rickshaw handles, backs aching, dignity worn thin. Training had been tough. Learning to use the dispatch app, understanding maintenance schedules, handling passenger complaints. He'd stayed up late practicing on a borrowed phone, asking his daughter to explain things he didn't understand. She'd smile and say, "You're learning faster than my professors teach." But he knew it wasn't about speed. It was about care, about doing right by the people who trusted him. Within weeks, more black cars arrived, 10 then 20, each one assigned to a driver who'd once pushed a rickshaw, carried bricks at construction sites, or sold vegetables by the roadside. Men with rough hands and tired eyes but hearts full of hope. He made sure they got fair shifts, proper breaks, and respect from passengers. No more being called just a driver. Now they were part of something. He walked the depot every morning before the first shift, checked tire pressure, made sure the charging ports worked, greeted each driver by name. "Sleep well? How's your boy's fever? Did your wife like the sweets?" Small questions, but they mattered, because he remembered what it felt like to be invisible. One afternoon, an older driver, thin with a cough that never left, pulled him aside. "They treated me like dirt before," he said, voice low. "Now people say sir when they get in. I don't know what to do with it." He clapped the man's shoulder. "Just say welcome, that's enough." Word spread fast. Passengers began choosing the black cars over autos and taxis, not just because they were clean or quiet, but because the drivers were kind. They helped old women with bags, waited patiently for late students, even gave free rides to hospital workers during night shifts. The service became known not for speed but for heart. Meanwhile, his daughter settled into medical college. She wore her white coat with pride, her stethoscope always around her neck like a badge of purpose. She still tutored, but now she used her earnings to buy medicines for patients who couldn't afford them. He'd see photos she sent, her standing beside classmates holding certificates, smiling in front of the hospital. But what moved him most were the notes she slipped into his lunchbox. "Today I helped deliver a baby. Thought of you." Or, "Professor said I have good hands, like yours." He kept every note in his uniform pocket. The day of the official launch came sooner than he expected. City officials, reporters, even a local TV crew gathered at the depot. Banners fluttered in the breeze. A small stage was set up. He stood beside the man who'd given him this chance, the one from the rain, and listened as speeches praised the project as a model of dignity in urban transport. When it was his turn to speak, his hands shook. He'd never stood in front of so many people. But he looked out and saw the faces he knew, the drivers, their families, neighbors from his old lane, and he found his voice. "I didn't build this," he said, voice steady now. "I just believe that people like us deserve better. Not charity, not pity, just a fair chance. And today we're taking it." Applause rose, not polite clapping, but real roaring sound that filled the street. He stepped down, eyes wet, and walked to the front of the line of black cars. They gleamed under the morning sun, doors open, ready. Then he did something no one expected. He walked back to where his old rickshaw stood, still chained to the same post near the tea stall. He unlocked it, wheeled it slowly to the center of the depot, and placed it gently beside the first black car. Rust against polish, wood against steel, past beside future. "This," he said, touching the rickshaw's handle, "is where I started. And this," he added, resting a hand on the car's roof, "is where we're going." No one spoke for a moment. Then one driver stepped forward and placed his hand on the rickshaw. Another joined. Soon a dozen men stood in a quiet circle around it, not mourning what was lost, but honoring what had carried them this far. That evening, he returned to the spot where he used to wait for fares. The street was the same cracks in the pavement, same stray dog napping under the neem tree. But everything felt different. He wasn't pushing anymore. He was leading. His daughter met him there holding 2 cups of tea from their favorite stall. She didn't say much, just handed him a cup and stood beside him, watching the black cars glide past one after another like a river of quiet promise. "Proud of you. she said softly. He sipped his tea, warm and sweet. I'm proud of us. Back home that night, he opened the metal box under the bed. He took out the acceptance letter, the scholarship notice, the notes from his daughter, and added a new one, a printed photo from the launch day. Him standing beside the black cars, head high, eyes clear. He closed the box and placed it back. Outside, the city hummed. Somewhere, a black car stopped to let an old woman cross. Somewhere else, a young doctor checked a patient's pulse. And in a small room lit by a single bulb, a father and daughter sat together, not rich, not famous, but finally, blessedly, at peace. The road ahead was still long, but for the first time it wasn't walked alone. It was shared. And that made all the difference. Years had passed, but the dawn still came the same way, soft, quiet, painting the sky in pale gold. He stood at the edge of the street where it all began, hands in his pockets, watching the first black car of the day glide past. It moved without noise, without smoke, just a smooth hum cutting through the morning calm. The driver, a young man he'd trained himself, gave a small wave as he passed. He nodded back. The neighborhood had changed. New buildings rose where old shacks once leaned. Streetlights stayed on all night now. But this corner, the one with the chipped blue bench and the banyan tree whose roots cracked the pavement, had stayed the same. And so had he in the ways that mattered. His daughter was a doctor now. Not just any doctor. She ran a small clinic right here in the same lane where they'd once shared a single room. It wasn't fancy. Just 2 rooms, a waiting area with plastic chairs and a shelf full of medicines she often paid for herself. But people came from miles away because she listened, really listened. Like her father had taught her. Kindness wasn't in grand gestures, but in the space between words. He visited her every Sunday. Not as a patient, but just to sit to watch her work. He'd bring her favorite jaggery sweets, set them on the counter, and wait quietly in the corner while she checked blood pressure, bandaged cuts, or held the hand of an old woman who just needed someone to talk to. Sometimes, after closing, they'd walk home together under the streetlights. She'd tell him about a child who smiled for the first time after treatment, or a mother who cried with relief when she said, "It's not serious." He'd listen, proud but never saying so out loud. Pride, he'd learned, was best shown in silence, in the way you stood a little taller when your child walked into a room. The transport cooperative he helped build now ran over 200 electric cars across the city. It employed more than 300 drivers, rickshaw pullers, cycle van riders, even a few former street vendors who'd needed a second chance. He wasn't the boss anymore. He'd stepped back last year, handing leadership to a younger man who'd once pushed a rickshaw beside him. But he still came by the depot every few days, not to inspect, but to talk. To remind them, this isn't just about driving. It's about carrying people with respect. One afternoon, a group of schoolchildren visited the depot as part of a Community Heroes project. Their teacher asked him to speak. He didn't give a speech, just sat on a bench and told them how he used to count coins to buy rice, how he once walked 10 kilometers because his sandals broke, how he believed, really believed, that if you kept your head down and your heart open, life might surprise you. Afterward, a small boy tugged his sleeve. "Did you ever think you'd be important?" He smiled. "I'm not important. I just did what needed doing." The boy frowned. "But everyone looks up to you." "No," he said gently. "They look up to the idea that someone like them can rise. That's the real gift." Later that week, his daughter called him to the clinic, not for a checkup, but for a surprise. She led him to a newly painted room at the back. Bright walls, a small desk, shelves lined with children's books. On the door, a wooden plaque read, "Community Learning Corner, sponsored by the City Transport Dignity Project. This is for kids whose parents work long hours," she explained. "They can come here after school, do homework, learn hygiene, even get a snack. And it's free." He ran his hand over the plaque, saw his old rickshaw logo subtly carved into the corner. A quiet nod to where it all started. "You did this?" he asked. "We did," she corrected. "You gave them wheels. I'm giving them books. Same road, different stops." He hugged her then, tight, the way he used to when she was small and scared of thunder. She hugged back, strong and sure. That night he couldn't sleep, not from worry, but from fullness. He stepped outside and walked to the old spot under the banyan tree. The street was empty except for a street cat and the distant sound of a train. He sat on the blue bench, cool even in summer, and let his mind drift. He thought of his wife. Wondered if she could see them now. Her daughter in a white coat, her husband standing straight, no longer bent under weight, but lifted by purpose. He hoped she knew. He hoped she was smiling. A black car slowed nearby. The driver rolled down the window. "Sir, you shouldn't be out so late," he waved him off. "Just remembering." The driver nodded, understanding. "We wouldn't be here without you." "No," he said softly. "You'd be here anyway. You just needed someone to believe it first." The car drove on, its red taillights fading into the dark. The next morning he woke early. Not to work, but to walk. He passed the clinic, already open, his daughter tying her hair back as patients waited outside. He passed the depot where drivers washed the cars, laughing as water splashed. He passed children running to school, mothers sweeping doorsteps, chai sellers pouring steaming cups. He reached the edge of the city where the road turned to dust and fields began. He stood there for a long time, watching the sun climb higher. On his way back, a young man, maybe 20, stopped him. "Aren't you the rickshaw man who started the black cars?" He nodded, the young man's eyes shone. "My father drove one. Said you changed his life. Gave him dignity." He placed a hand on the young man's shoulder. "Your father changed his own life. I just handed him the keys." That evening, as he sat on his small balcony with a cup of tea, his daughter joined him. They didn't speak for a while. Just watched the sky turn orange, then purple, then deep blue. Finally she said, "Do you ever miss it? Pushing the rickshaw?" He thought about it. "Not the pain, not the hunger, but I miss the quiet. The feeling that every step mattered," she smiled. "It still does." He looked at her, this woman who once studied under a single bulb, who now healed strangers with steady hands, and knew she was right. The road hadn't ended. It had just grown wider, with room for more people to walk it together. And as the first stars appeared, he whispered, not to anyone, just to the night, "We made it, not in riches, not in fame, but in peace, in purpose, in the quiet certainty that love, when carried with honesty, can move mountains, or at least one rickshaw at a time." The story was never supposed to have a sixth part. After all, the road had been walked, the rickshaw retired, the black cars rolling steady, the daughter a doctor, the father at peace. But life, as he'd learned long ago, doesn't follow neat endings. It keeps unfolding, quietly, stubbornly, beautifully, like a river that finds new bends even after it seems to have reached the sea. It began with a letter, not the kind that came with college admissions or scholarship offers, but one written in shaky handwriting on lined notebook paper, folded 3 times and sealed with a sticker of a smiling sun. It arrived at the clinic, addressed simply, "To the doctor who listens." His daughter opened it during her lunch break. As she read, her eyes softened. She handed it to him without a word. Inside, a young girl, no older than 12, wrote about her father. He'd once driven one of the black cars but fell ill last year, a lung infection, worsened by years of breathing city dust. He couldn't work anymore. Medicine was expensive. Rent was due, and she was scared. Scared he'd go back to pushing a rickshaw even though his body couldn't take it. "I remember your father," his daughter said quietly. "He trained under you. Quiet man. Always wore a red cap," he remembered too. A man with kind eyes and a cough he tried to hide. He'd given him extra shifts during monsoon season because he knew the man had children in school. Now, that man's daughter was writing letters instead of playing outside. That evening he didn't go straight home. He walked to the address on the letter, a narrow lane behind the old textile market where buildings leaned into each other like tired friends. He found the room easily, door slightly open, a pot of weak tea steaming on a small stove, the man lying on a thin mat wrapped in a faded blanket. When he saw who it was, the man tried to sit up. "Sir, you shouldn't—" "Lie still," he said, kneeling beside him. "I came to see how you are." They talked for a long time, not about money, not about help, just about the weather, the neighborhood, how the black cars were doing. But in the silence between words, everything was said. Before leaving, he placed an envelope on the small table. Inside was enough for 2 months' rent and medicine, not from the cooperative, not from charity, but from his own savings. And a note, "Rest, your daughter is brave. Let her be a child. The next day, his daughter visited too, with a stethoscope, a bag of vitamins, and a promise of free checkups. She didn't just treat the man. She sat with the girl, showed her how to wash hands properly, gave her a notebook and said, "Write your dreams in here. Not just your worries." Word of their visit spread, not through announcements but through whispers between neighbors, mothers at the water tap, drivers at the depot. Soon others began coming to the clinic with quiet troubles. A widow whose son dropped out of school, an elderly couple afraid of eviction, a young woman who wanted to study but had no one to watch her siblings. His daughter couldn't turn them away, and he couldn't watch her carry it all alone, so they started something small. Every Sunday morning in the open courtyard behind the clinic, they held what they called neighbor time. No appointments. No fees. Just tea, conversation, and help where it was needed. He'd bring retired drivers to fix leaky roofs or carry heavy sacks. She'd connect students with tutors or help fill out government forms. Sometimes they just sat and listened, because often that was the real medicine. One Sunday, a teenager showed up, head down, hands in pockets. He didn't speak at first, just stood near the gate watching. Finally, his daughter went to him. "What's your name?" she asked gently. He mumbled it, barely audible. "Why are you here?" "My uncle said." "You help people like us." "People like you?" she repeated. "People who don't have anyone," she nodded. "Then you're in the right place." Turns out the boy had been sleeping at the railway station since his mother passed. He'd been skipping meals, avoiding police, trying to sell old newspapers to survive. His daughter arranged a temporary stay with a trusted neighbor, got him enrolled in night school, and introduced him to a driver who needed help washing cars. The boy worked hard. Within months, he was saving coins in a tin can, dreaming of becoming a mechanic. He watched all this unfold, not as a hero, but as a witness. And in watching, he realized something. Their story wasn't just theirs anymore. It had become a seed, and seeds, when planted in good soil, grow into forests. One afternoon, the man from the rain, the one who'd started it all, visited the courtyard. He was older now, moved slower, but his eyes still held that same quiet fire. "You've built something bigger than I imagined," he said, sipping tea from a clay cup. "No," he replied. "We just kept the door open." That night, as he sat on his balcony, he thought about legacy. Not the kind written in newspapers or carved in stone, but the kind that lives in actions, like a father pushing a rickshaw so his daughter could heal, like a daughter opening a clinic so others wouldn't suffer in silence, like a boy learning to fix engines so he'd never sleep on a platform again. The next week, the cooperative launched a new program, Second Chance Rides. Not just for drivers, but for anyone willing to learn, women, elders, even former street kids. They'd be trained as dispatch assistants, electricians, customer care reps. Dignity, he'd learned, wasn't just about wheels. It was about worth. His daughter, inspired, started a young healers group, teenagers learning basic first aid, hygiene, and empathy. They visited slums, taught hand washing, checked for fever. One of them was the girl who'd written the letter. Now she wore a small badge and carried a notebook full of dreams. "Doctor," she'd written on the first page. Like her. He smiled every time he saw her. Years kept passing. His hair turned fully gray. His steps slowed. But his heart? His heart stayed strong, fed by the sight of black cars carrying hope, by the sound of laughter in the courtyard, by the quiet pride in his daughter's eyes when a patient hugged her and said, "You saved me." One morning very early, before even the birds were awake, he walked to the old spot under the banyan tree. He didn't sit this time. Just stood, hands behind his back, watching the first light touch the road. A black car approached. It stopped. The driver stepped out, a young woman, one of the first women hired by the cooperative. She'd started as a cleaner, then learned dispatch, now managed half the fleet. "Good morning, sir," she said, respectful but warm. "Morning," he replied. "You're early." "Wanted to see the sunrise," she said. "And thank you. My daughter starts nursing school next week." He nodded. "Tell her to listen more than she speaks." "I will." As she drove off, he placed his palm flat against the rough bark of the banyan tree, same tree that had shaded him during the hardest days. He closed his eyes, felt the pulse of the city waking up, felt the weight of all the hands he'd held, all the lives gently lifted. He wasn't the same man who once pushed a rickshaw alone, but he was still that man too, just stretched wider by love, deepened by time. And as the sun rose fully painting the black cars in gold, he whispered to the wind, not for anyone to hear, but because it needed saying, "The road goes on, and that's enough."